She was 7 months pregnant, barefoot on a cliff in the middle of a November storm, and the man holding her shoulders, the man who had cried at their wedding, who had built the nursery, who had kissed her forehead and said, "You have given me everything," was about to let go. Not an accident, not a fight that went too far, a decision, calculated, documented, with her name at the top of the page and one word at the bottom: expedite. She went over the edge. And here's the part nobody sees coming. Someone jumped after her, not to be a hero, not because he loved her, but because Sharon Calloway was the only person still alive who could bring down an empire 15 years in the making, and someone had made very sure he knew that before she hit the water. She survived the fall. What she did next destroyed everything her husband built. And the woman in the burgundy coat, standing on that cliff with her arms crossed, watching, she was not the mistress. She was the one who had been running all of it from the beginning. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will never look at blind trust the same way again. This is the story of a woman who lost everything and discovered that the most dangerous version of herself had been there the whole time, just waiting to be needed. She was not supposed to survive. That is the thing nobody talks about when they tell this story. They talk about the cliff, the storm, the 200-foot drop into black November water. They talk about the man who jumped after her, silver at his temples, dark coat spreading out behind him like a wing against the lightning-split sky. But what nobody talks about is the 4 seconds before. 4 seconds where Sharon Calloway stood at the edge of that cliff barefoot, 7 months pregnant, her cream wool coat whipping sideways in the wind, and looked at the man she had loved for 6 years. The man who had held her hand in the hospital 2 years ago when they lost their first pregnancy. The man who had cried. Actually cried. Or at least, she had believed he had. In those 4 seconds, Sharon was not screaming. She was not begging. She was just looking at him, like she was trying to understand how a person becomes this. And then Garrett Calloway put both hands flat on her shoulders and pushed. The ocean hit like concrete. That is the only honest way to describe it. Not water, concrete. One full-body impact that drove the air from her lungs and the sound from her ears and the heat from her skin in one single violent instant. She went under immediately. The cold was the kind that does not feel cold at first. It feels like fire, like every nerve ending lighting at once. And then the cold comes, and it is total and absolute, and there is nothing else. 7 months pregnant, underwater, in a storm, in the dark. She fought, arms clawing upward, one hand pressed flat against her stomach, as if she could protect her daughter through sheer will. Her coat was dragging her down. The current was pulling from 3 directions at once. She could not tell which way was up. And then something grabbed her arm. Hard, like iron, coming from below, from someone who had dived deeper than the surface, who had calculated where the current would carry her, who had gone down into the dark to find her. Cole Merritt. He pulled, they broke the surface into the storm, into the waves, into the lightning, cracking the sky, open directly above them. Sharon was barely conscious. Every time a wave hit, she simply took it. Cole was the only thing keeping her face above water. His voice, right at her ear, low and urgent. "Stay with me. Eyes open. I have got you." She tried to answer. Nothing came out. "I have got you," he said again, like he was telling himself too. 20 minutes in that water, in that cold, in that dark, in that storm. When he finally pulled her onto the rocks, she coughed up what felt like half the Atlantic Ocean, which, as he told her, much later, was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard in his life, because it meant she was breathing. She opened her eyes. Gray sky, lightning. A man with silver at his temples crouched over her in the rain, watching her with an intensity she did not have words for yet. "My baby," she started. "Is okay," he said. "Firm, immediate. You are both okay." She did not entirely believe him, but she was too exhausted to argue. "We are going to go back. We have to go back. Because you need to understand who Sharon Calloway was before that cliff, what she had built, what she trusted, and exactly how carefully, how deliberately, over how many years, the man she called her husband walked her to that edge, one quiet step at a time. But I need you to know something first. She survived. And what she did next, what this woman, soaking wet, half frozen, 8 weeks from her due date, did with the wreckage of her life, is the part of this story that is going to stay with you long after it is over. So stay with me. We are just getting started. 3 months before the cliff, Hartford, Connecticut, October. Sharon Calloway had what most people would call a beautiful life, and I do not mean that cynically. Not yet. I mean it genuinely. The kind of life that, from the inside, felt earned, real, hers. The house was a restored Victorian on Elm Ridge Drive, original hardwood floors. A wraparound porch she had repainted herself the summer before she got pregnant. Window boxes she had planted with lavender because she had read that lavender was calming, and she was, at that point, a woman who was trying very hard to be calm about everything. She had been a senior auditor at a financial firm before she left to focus on the pregnancy, genuinely good at her job, the kind of auditor who could look at 12 months of transaction records and find the one number that did not belong in about 40 minutes. Her supervisor had told her once, "Sharon, you have a gift for finding what people are trying to hide." She had laughed it off at the time. She was not laughing about it later. She had met Garrett at a charity gala. He was exactly what charity galas produce. Well-dressed, articulate, the kind of man who made every room feel slightly more organized just by walking into it. He had found her by the windows, slightly apart from the crowd, and instead of giving her the usual opener, he had said, "You look like the only person here who actually read the mission statement." She had read the mission statement. 6 months later, they were engaged. A year after that, married. The wedding was in Vermont, September, peak foliage. Her best friend Beth was her maid of honor. Maggie, Garrett's mother, cried during the vows, which Sharon had taken as a good sign. A woman that warm could not have raised a monster. She was wrong about that. But Maggie's story is more complicated than it sounds, and we will get there. The pregnancy was wanted, fiercely. After the loss 2 years earlier, a grief that Sharon still carried in a specific quiet place she did not talk about. This pregnancy felt like something restored, something given back. Garrett had been attentive, had set up the nursery before she was through her first trimester. Soft gray walls, a white crib, a mobile with little wooden stars. He had done it while she was at her mother's for a weekend. She had come home and stood in the doorway of that room and cried. Here's something worth saying directly, because I think it matters. When we love someone, we do this thing where we take the evidence of love and file it away as proof of character. The grand gestures, the thoughtful moments, the times they showed up, as if kindness in the good times tells you who someone really is. It does not. Character shows up under pressure. Character shows up when loving you costs them something. The question Sharon never asked early enough was not, "Does he make me feel loved?" It was, "What does he do when loving me is inconvenient?" Garrett Calloway was spectacular at love when love cost him nothing. The cracks came small, easy to explain away, weekend trips for work that produced no details, and no photographs. A phone left face down on the kitchen counter every single evening like clockwork. A particular way he had of going very still when she asked him anything specific about his business. Not defensive, just still, like a man who had practiced stillness until it looked natural. Sharon noticed. She always noticed. But she told herself she was being paranoid, hypervigilant. That is what happens after loss. Your nervous system never quite trusts that good things stay good. She was half right. Beth noticed too. Beth, who had known Sharon since their first week of college, who had watched Sharon navigate every difficult thing in her adult life with steadiness and intelligence, called her on a Thursday in October and said, with the particular directness that only a 20-year friendship earns, I am just going to say it. Something feels off about him. Sharon had said, you worry too much. Beth had said, that is rich, coming from you. They had laughed, changed the subject. Sharon had filed it away in that same quiet place where she kept other things she was not ready to examine. And then she went looking for a pen. She was looking for a pen. Of all the things to bring a life down, a pen. She had been in the nesting phase for 2 weeks, that third trimester compulsion, where your body decides the entire house needs reorganizing and you are physically incapable of stopping it. She was making a list for the hospital bag and had wandered into Garrett's home office because her own pens were dried out and his desk had that good black rollerball she liked. He was out, a dinner meeting, some development deal in Providence. She found the pen in the top drawer. She found the false panel behind the bookshelf entirely by accident. Her hip caught the corner of the bottom shelf as she turned, and something clicked. Audible, distinct. She almost did not look. That is the part I keep returning to. She stood there for a full 30 seconds with her hand on the shelf edge, the pen in her other hand, and almost just pushed it closed and walked out. But Sharon Calloway was an auditor, and auditors look. The drive was matte black, no label, the size of her thumb. She took it to her own laptop at the kitchen table and plugged it in with a kind of slow, methodical calm that she described later as the feeling of doing something you know is going to change everything. But you have not caught up to that knowledge yet. The files loaded, wire transfers, hundreds of them, moving through shell companies, through accounts in Delaware and Nevada, and offshore structures she recognized from her professional years. Names she had met at dinner parties, the alderman from West Hartford, a developer from Greenwich, a federal judge she had shaken hands with at a fundraiser, notes beside each name asset, compromised, leverage pending, and then a folder labeled simply DW. She opened it. Diana Whitmore. Sharon had met Diana exactly twice, once at a firm event, once at a dinner at the Callaways. Silver blonde, late 40s, old Connecticut, money. Pleasant, forgettable, except for one thing Sharon had noticed and then dismissed, the way Diana watched Garrett. Not like a woman watching a man she desired, like a woman watching an investment she owned. Sharon was not dismissing it now. The photographs in the folders were not romantic. That was what made them worse somehow. They were operational. Garrett and Diana at locations Sharon recognized, but the body language between them was not lovers. It was something older and more transactional. Employer and employee, handler and asset, and then the last file. 2 pages, her name at the top, Sharon Calloway. Liability assessment. She read it twice, 3 times. Her hands were not shaking. Subject demonstrates high pattern recognition and financial literacy. Subject holds legal signatory authority on 4 shell entities established between 2019 and 2021. Subject's ongoing access presents escalating exposure risk as operational scale increases. Recommend controlled resolution prior to Q1. Child complicates timeline. Expedite. Controlled resolution. She was 7 months pregnant, and her husband had written the word expedite next to her name in a document about making her disappear. Sharon closed the laptop, sat very still, for 4 seconds. Then she stood up, walked to the bathroom, and threw up. And then she did something that tells you everything about who she was underneath all that careful, trusting, lavender in the window box life. She went back to the table, opened the laptop again, and started photographing every single file with her phone. She did not know yet that Garrett had a camera in his office. Not an obvious one. The kind you would not find unless you were looking for it. A notification had already appeared on his phone across town, showing her silhouette at his bookshelf. But she photographed everything anyway. And then she opened her email and sent every image to Beth's address, with a subject line that said only, "Keep these safe. Do not open yet. I will explain." That was the smartest thing Sharon Calloway had done in 6 years, and it almost was not enough. If you are ever in a moment like Sharon's, hear this clearly. Whatever you do first, document before you confront. Document before you run. Document before you do anything else. The people who build these kinds of lives count on the person who discovers the truth being too shocked to act. They count on hesitation. They count on the instinct to seek an explanation before securing the evidence. Do not give them that time. Photograph it. Send it somewhere safe, and then figure out the rest. The next 2 days were the longest of Sharon's life. Garrett came home that night, and she performed normal across a candlelit dinner table with a precision that surprised her. He performed normal back. 2 people, both knowing, both pretending, both the whole meal conducted in a language that had no words. He knew she had been in his office. She knew he knew. Neither of them said a single word about it. On Sunday, he suggested a drive up the coast. He suggested fresh air. Said he wanted to think. The baby stuff was making him feel cooped up, he said, and he just needed an hour with the ocean before the storm rolled in. Sharon went. I know, but understand what she was doing. She had been performing normal for 48 hours. She was still processing. She was still telling herself there might be context she was missing, an explanation she had not found yet, even though every professional instinct she had was screaming that there was not. She was 7 months pregnant, and she was terrified, and she went because some part of her was still, underneath everything, hoping she was wrong. That is what betrayal does. It does not just hurt you. It makes you doubt your own perception until the moment you simply cannot doubt it anymore. The cliff path on the Rhode Island coast was narrow, wet grass, rocky outcroppings. The ocean 200 feet below, already white-capped and violent. Garrett walked slightly behind her the entire way up. She noticed, filed it, kept walking. When they reached the overlook, he stopped, and the quality of that stillness, the specific finality of it, told her what she had been refusing to accept for 48 hours. She turned to face him. His eyes were flat, not angry, not sad, not conflicted, just finished, like he had already moved past this moment in his mind and was simply completing the final step of a process he had been planning for weeks. I am sorry it has to be this way, he said. He was not sorry. She could see clearly that he was not sorry. And then his hands were on her shoulders, and the ground was gone, and the wind hit her full body, and she was falling. Up on that cliff, doing absolutely nothing, stood a woman in a burgundy coat. Diana Whitmore, arms crossed, watching with the patient expression of someone observing a task being completed on schedule. In the water, everything was darkness and cold and the desperate animal instruction to move upward. Sharon clawed toward where she thought the surface was. One hand pressed against her stomach, lungs burning, the coat dragging her down. Cole Merritt had been parked on the coastal road for 37 minutes. He had received a 2-word text from his contact 40 minutes earlier. She is moving. He had been driving hard toward the overlook when he saw 2 figures at the cliff edge. He had watched Garrett push her. He did not pause, did not calculate risk, did not think about the 200-foot drop or the November water or the storm. He ran to the edge and jumped. He found her in the dark below the surface, sinking faster than he had calculated. His grip on her wrist was iron. He pulled. They broke the surface together into the chaos of the storm. Sharon was barely with him. Her head kept lolling. He kept her face above the water with one arm and swam with the other, navigating toward the rocky shore by feel, because visibility was essentially nothing. 20 minutes. In that cold, in that dark. When he got her onto the rocks and she coughed and breathed, he crouched over her in the rain and said her name firmly until her eyes focused. "My baby," she managed. "Is okay," he said. "You are both okay." He meant it. He had been watching over this woman for 14 months from inside the operation that was trying to destroy her. He was not going to lose her on a November cliff in Rhode Island. Up on the overlook, Garrett was on his phone. "It is done," he said. Silence on the other end. Then Diana's voice, measured and cool. "You are certain. I watched them go in. There is no surviving that drop in this storm. Send someone to confirm." Garrett looked out at the black water. Nothing moving on the surface, except waves. "Send someone to confirm, Garrett." Diana said it the way you say something to a person who no longer has the option of disagreeing. He made the call. Cole found the sea cave by feel, half carrying Sharon along the rock face with her arm around his shoulders and her feet leaving small dark marks on the stone. Low ceiling, salt smell, out of the rain. He got her against the wall and draped his suit jacket over her shoulders. She was shaking, full body tremors, teeth knocking together, the early stages of hypothermia, hitting all at once. "You need to stay awake," he said, crouching in front of her. "Talk to me." "About what?" she said. Her voice came out in pieces. "Anything." She looked at him, really looked, the sharp jaw, the silver at his temples, eyes that were completely steady, even right now. Even in a sea cave, in a storm, with a helicopter already cutting through the thunder, somewhere above them. "Who are you?" she asked. "Cole," he said. "Cole Merritt." "That is not what I asked." Something shifted in his expression, just slightly. "Get warm first," he said. "We will talk." But outside, the helicopter was getting closer, and Cole's hand moved to something inside what remained of his jacket. Something she could not quite see in the dark. "Do not move," he said quietly. Not a sound. She pressed herself against the cave wall, one hand flat on her stomach. The helicopter passed directly overhead. A beam of light swept the cave entrance, just the edge of it, just enough, and moved on. She held her breath until she physically could not hold it any more. "Is it gone?" she whispered. Cole waited 10 full seconds before he answered. "For now," he said. They moved at dawn. Cole made one call on a waterproof phone she had not known he was carrying. 3 sentences. She did not recognize the language. Then he said, "There is a car 20 minutes north. Can you walk?" She looked at her feet. The cuts from the rocks had crusted over. Every joint felt like it had been fed through a machine. Her back was doing that specific 3rd trimester thing where it had stopped being subtle about its objections. "I can walk," she said. She walked. The safe house was at the end of a dirt road behind a tree line in Vermont. Small, unremarkable, the kind of structure that announced no one actually lives here, as clearly as a sign could have. Inside, a cot, a wood stove, a table, two chairs, locked cabinets, a long one wall, a laptop already running. Sharon sat on the cot and looked at the floor and said nothing for 3 full minutes. Cole gave her those 3 minutes. When he finally sat down across from her, he led with a thermos of coffee and a protein bar. "Drink that first," he said. She drank it. Then, "Who are you?" The real answer this time. "Cole Merritt, federal investigator, undercover, embedded inside your husband's network for the last 14 months. Sharon stared at him. "You have been inside his organization for over a year." "Yes." "And you knew about me." A pause. "Yes." "You knew he had my name on his accounts. You knew about the liability assessment. I knew about the document. I found out approximately 3 weeks ago." Her head came up fast. 3 weeks. I was building a case for extraction, trying to time the move without alerting Garrett. He stopped. Something tightened in his jaw. I did not move fast enough. She looked at this man who had jumped off a cliff to save her, who had held her above water for 20 minutes in a storm, who had stayed awake the entire night in a sea cave, making sure the search team did not find them. What she felt was not gratitude. Not yet. It was something that lived right next to fury and grief and an exhaustion she did not have words for. "My entire marriage," she said slowly, "was a setup from the beginning." Cole did not answer. He did not need to. He married me to use me as a legal shield for his operation. That may have been how it started. "Do not," she said. Her voice came out sharp and certain. "Do not give me may have been. Do not soften it." He stopped, and then he said something she had not expected. "You are right. I am sorry. That is what the evidence shows." She appreciated it more than she could explain in that moment. There is something important in that. When someone softens the truth to protect your feelings, they are usually managing their own discomfort, not yours. A person who is genuinely on your side tells you clearly what the evidence shows, and then they stay while you process it. Cole told her the rest over the next hour. The structure of the operation, the shell companies, the names, the money flowing through accounts across 3 states and 4 offshore structures. Sharon listened with the professional attention she had spent 9 years building, the part of herself she had quietly set aside when she left her career for a man who had been lying to her since the charity gala. She felt that part of herself waking back up, slowly, like a muscle that had been still too long. "You said I hold legal signatory authority on 4 shell accounts," she said. "4? Yes, which means I can legally authorize an audit request." "That is correct. So if we build the right document package, transaction trails, account chains, and I sign the authorization, it is not just evidence. It is admissible, airtight, impossible to suppress." Cole looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, the way a person looks when they realize they have been underestimating someone. "You would be going on record," he said. "They would know it was you." "They already want me dead," she said flatly. "Staying invisible is not exactly protecting me at this point." He almost smiled. "Just barely." "Give me 4 hours," he said. She believed him. She was beginning, in spite of everything, to believe him. Day 6, Cole cracked the syndicate's servers at 2:47 in the morning. He had been working at it for 2 days. Sharon had been nearby on the cot, cross-legged with a notebook, writing down everything she could remember from the files she had photographed. Account names, transaction figures, names she had met at dinner parties, filed away without knowing why she was filing them. The habit of pattern recognition does not turn off just because you stop using it professionally. When the firewall finally broke, Cole went completely still. No typing, no movement, just staring at the screen. Sharon looked up from the notebook. What? He turned the laptop toward her. She read for 3 minutes, scrolled, read more. And then she sat back and said quietly, "Oh my God." Because here is what nobody investigating Garrett Calloway had understood. Garrett was not running the operation. He never had been. The strategic decisions, the financial architecture, the long game moves that had been running for 15 years before Sharon ever met the man at a charity gala. All of it traced back to a single encrypted account. One decision maker at the top of everything, Diana Whitmore. She built it, Cole said. His voice was controlled, but underneath it, she could hear something that sounded almost like cold fury. The whole thing. 15 years. She recruited Garrett when he was a 26-year-old developer with ambition and no ethics. Positioned him as the public face. Visible, powerful, useful. Kept herself completely off the radar. She used him the same way he used you. She just did it for longer. Sharon pressed her fingers against her mouth. The woman in the burgundy coat, the woman who had stood on that cliff with her arms crossed and watched a pregnant woman fall and felt nothing, not the mistress, the architect. And then, this is the moment I want you to pay attention to. This is the moment Sharon Calloway stopped being a woman things were happening to and became the woman who was going to decide how this ended. She grabbed her notebook. "Okay," she said, "then we need everything. Every transaction trail that connects back to Diana, every account, every name, one package, airtight, Sharon. I have legal authorization on 4 shell accounts. You said that yourself. I sign the audit request, the accounts get frozen, and everything built on top of them collapses. All of it." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "You realize what you are signing up for." She met his eyes directly. "I realize I am 7 months pregnant in a Vermont safe house because my husband threw me off a cliff. I think I am already signed up." He nodded. "Once. Slow. Give me 4 hours to compile." "You have said that before. This time I mean it." She almost smiled. For the first time in 6 days, she almost smiled. And for approximately 3 hours, sitting at that table in a Vermont safe house, with Cole working across from her and the wood stove, making the only sound in the room, Sharon Calloway allowed herself to believe they were going to win. She was wrong. They had 90 minutes. Sharon heard it first, that specific rhythm of movement through brush, the sound Cole had spent 4 days drilling into her. Too deliberate, too evenly spaced, not an animal. Cole. She said it flat and quiet, and he was already moving before she finished the word. He was at the window, not looking through it, looking at its reflection, at the tree line behind them. His jaw was tight. "How many?" she said. "At least 4, maybe 6. He turned. "We need to go right now. The files." He held up a drive, already in his hand. Of course it was. "Move." They went out the back. Cole first, Sharon right behind him, moving as fast as she could move, which was faster than anyone had a right to expect from a woman 7 months pregnant who had been through what she had been through in the last 6 days. Adrenaline does something specific. It strips away everything except the one instruction that matters. Go. The tree line. Behind them, the safe house door came off its hinges, loud, close, decisive. "Do not look back," Cole said. She did not look back. They moved through the trees in the dark with no lights. Cole had her wrist, pulling her through the gaps in the brush, changing direction twice without warning. Then, a flashlight beam cut through the trees from the right. He yanked her left, down into a drainage ditch. Both of them flat against the cold ground, not breathing. The beam swept overhead, moved on. 3 seconds, he breathed. Go! They went. The car was a gray sedan parked off the old logging road. He drove without headlights for the first mile, windows down, listening. Before he let out a breath and turned the lights on, Sharon's hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, more like the aftermath of every nerve in her body firing at once, and then finding nothing left to fire at. How did they find us? She asked. There is a leak, Cole said. Someone inside the federal contact channel tipped Garrett's team. She absorbed this. So we cannot go through standard channels. Not directly. Then how? I have one more contact. One person I trust completely. Outside the compromised pipeline. She looked at him. One, and if you are wrong about them. He glanced over. Then we are out of options. Sharon looked out the window at the dark coastline, the same ocean that had almost killed her 9 days ago, sitting out there, massive and indifferent. She thought about the drainage ditch, the flashlight beam passing 1 foot above her face, the sound of the safe house door coming off its hinges. She thought about the baby kicking hard twice in the last hour, as if also expressing a strong opinion about the situation. Drive, she said. They drove through the dark toward Providence, and somewhere around the 2nd hour, Cole said, I need to tell you something about the leak. She waited. I think I know who it is. Tell me. Diana has a private attorney. He has been on her payroll for 11 years. He had access to the federal contact chain through a shared task force arrangement. His name is in the files we pulled from the servers. Sharon was quiet for a moment. Can we prove it? It is on the drive. Then it goes in the package. Yes. They drove in silence for another mile. Then Sharon said, Who is your one contact? The person you trust. Agent Patricia Owens, he said. She is the one I have been feeding raw data to for 14 months through a channel that bypasses the compromised pipeline. She is the reason we even have a case, a woman. Yes. Good, Sharon said. And she meant it in a way that was both specific and general. Cole almost smiled again. They stopped for gas outside Providence. At 3 in the morning, the station fluorescent and empty. Cole went inside. Sharon sat with one hand on her stomach, watching the dark road. Her phone buzzed. Beth's spare, untraceable, unknown number. They know about the lighthouse. Do not go there. She stared at it. Cole came back with 2 coffees. She showed him the phone. He read the message. His expression did something complicated. That is from Maggie, he said. Sharon went completely still. Garrett's mother. Yes. How does she? Because she has been feeding me information for 4 months. She found out what Garrett was 3 years ago. Found a file she was not supposed to find, not unlike you, and instead of running, she reached out to the agency. Sharon stared at the dark windshield. Maggie, who cried at my wedding? Who has been trying to protect you from inside that house for 2 years? Yes, something moved through Sharon, then that she could not name. Relief and grief and gratitude, all arriving at the same moment, each one genuine, none of them diminishing the others. She knew, Sharon said quietly, about the liability assessment. She found out 6 weeks ago. She is the one who pushed me to accelerate extraction. You did not move fast enough. No, he said. I did not. The silence between them had weight. She said, Where do we go instead of the lighthouse? Cole was quiet for a moment. There is a marina, an hour north. I have a boat docked there as a contingency. The satellite equipment on board is better than the lighthouse, and it is entirely off any grid Diana's team monitors. A boat, Sharon said. A boat. She looked at him. You are genuinely unhinged, probably, he agreed, completely unbothered. And she laughed. Real and sudden, a little startling to both of them, like her body had remembered it was allowed to do that and simply did it. "Let us go to the boat," she said. The marina was quiet at 4 in the morning, cold, dark, the particular quiet of water at night, which has texture to it. Rope sounds and the distant bell of a buoy somewhere on the water, and nothing else. Cole's boat was a 32-foot sailboat, docked at the far end. Below deck, the satellite equipment was everything he had promised. Military-grade uplink, isolated from any compromised network. Sharon sat at the small table and worked. For 90 minutes, she worked, organizing the document package, flagging the transaction trails that connected directly to Diana Whitmore, building the chain of evidence with the same methodical precision she had applied in her 9 years as a professional auditor. She was in her element in a way she had not been in a very long time, and there was something almost peaceful about it, being in the one place she had always been most completely herself. Cole completed the uplink connection at 5:47 in the morning. "Ready," he said. She signed the audit authorization. Did not hesitate for 1 second. He sent the package. And for 45 seconds, Sharon Calloway allowed herself to believe it was over. The evidence was out. Agent Owens had the full package. The accounts would be frozen. The arrests would follow. She put both hands flat on the table and let out a breath that came from somewhere very deep. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he said. And then her phone rang. Beth's voice, frantic and immediate. "Sharon. Oh God, Sharon. They have Maggie." The cold came back. Not the ocean cold. Something interior. Worse. What? There were men at the house. Garrett's people. An hour ago. She had just tried to warn you, and they knew she had made contact, and they took her. They took her, Sharon. Sharon looked at Cole. His face had gone absolutely still. "Where?" she said into the phone. "Beth, where did they take her?" A pause. Then Beth, quieter. "The police scanner my neighbor monitors. There was a call placed to a property in Narragansett. Garrett's development project. The building on the harbor. The one that has been stalled for 3 years." Sharon hung up, looked at Cole. "They took Maggie. I heard. Garrett took his own mother because we sent the package. Because he is panicking. Yes. He thinks I will trade the evidence for her. That is what he is counting on." Something moved through Sharon then that had been building for 9 days. Since the cliff. Since the cave. Since the safe house and the logging road and the drainage ditch with the flashlight passing 1 foot above her face. Something that had been sharpening itself quietly the entire time. "He does not know me at all," she said. Cole held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he said, "he really does not." And then his phone, Agent Owens, her voice tight and immediate. "Cole. The package arrived. We are moving on the accounts. But I need you to know something. Diana Whitmore has not run. She is not going to run. She is heading to the harbor herself." "The Narragansett property." Cole went still. "Why?" "Because she wants to be present for the ending. It is consistent with her profile. She believes she can still manage this. She does not know the accounts are frozen. She will find out when she gets there. But Cole, she will be in the same location as the hostage. And she does not know we have the property covered." Cole looked at Sharon. Sharon had heard every word. "Both of them," she said. "In one place. Yes. And Maggie is there. Yes." She picked up her jacket. "Then we know where we are going." Cole was already moving. The Narragansett development was a half-finished building on the harbor. 12 floors, structural work complete, interior gutted. The kind of project that had been stalled for 3 years in a way that had nothing to do with permits. Sharon now understood exactly what it had to do with. Cole had contacted Owens. The federal response team was 15 minutes out. Cole went in through the parking structure. Sharon was supposed to stay at the car, She did not stay at the car. She found Maggie on the fourth floor, a room with plastic sheeting for walls and a folding chair and two men outside the door who were no longer standing by the time Cole reached them ahead of her. Sharon knelt in front of Maggie, who was 71 years old and had been sitting there for 4 hours in November cold. Maggie reached out and held Sharon's face in both hands. "You got out," she said, like that was the only thing she had needed to know. "We both got out," Sharon said. She helped her to her feet. Cole appeared in the doorway. "Garrett is on the roof, access level," he said. "Diana just arrived. Ground floor." "Patricia's team is 8 minutes out." Sharon handed Maggie to Cole. "Get her out." Sharon. 8 minutes. Get her out. I will be right behind you." He held her gaze for a long moment. Everything that had accumulated between them in 9 days of sea caves and safe houses and drainage ditches and dark boat cabins. All of it present in that moment without either of them needing to say it. 2 minutes, he said. Then I'm coming back in. 2 minutes, she agreed. Garrett was at the roof access door when she reached the top of the stairs. He looked wrong. The suit was the same. The posture was almost the same, but something in his face had cracked slightly, the way a wall cracks before it falls, and what was showing through the crack was not anger or menace. It was fear. Sharon had never seen Garrett Calloway afraid of anything in 6 years of marriage. She understood what it meant, the accounts. He knew the accounts were frozen. He knew the package had gone out. He was standing on a roof in Narragansett at 6 in the morning, not because he had a plan, but because he had run out of them. "Where is the drive?" he said. "Already sent," she said simply. 2 hours ago. Federal contact. Full package. Every account, every transaction, every shell company, every name. Diana's, yours. Your attorney's." Something moved across his face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She held up her phone. The sending confirmation still on the screen. He stared at it. "You have no idea what you have done." "I know exactly what I have done." She kept her voice even. "I authorized an audit on 4 accounts that are in my name, accounts you put in my name, Garrett, because you thought I was someone you could control completely, and you were wrong about that." He took a step toward her. "Do not," she said. The absolute unhurried certainty in how she said it stopped him. She looked at him then. Really looked. The way you look at something when you are finally seeing it clearly, and the truth of it is smaller and sadder and simpler than the story you had been telling yourself. "You could have divorced me," she said. "Settled, moved on. I would have been fine. I would have rebuilt. I was good at my job before I left it for you." He said nothing. "But you could not let me exist outside of your control. Because the whole operation was built on my signature, my name. A woman with financial training and pattern recognition, walking around free in the world with knowledge of those accounts, that was a variable you could not manage from a distance and still nothing. So you chose this, all of it." She gestured at the half-finished building, the harbor below, the November sky, the entire situation that had begun on a cliff 9 days ago and ended here. "I hope it was worth it." Below them, sirens, getting closer, fast. Garrett's eyes went to the stairwell, back to her, back to the stairwell. "It is over," she said. He ran, not toward her, past her, toward the fire escape, out into the dark, and directly into the federal response team already positioned on the building's perimeter. They had him in cuffs before he cleared the second landing. Diana was on the ground floor when Agent Patricia Owens walked through the door. Burgundy coat, silver blonde hair, standing at the window, looking out at the harbor with her hands clasped behind her back, like a woman admiring a view she had paid considerably for. She turned around slowly when she heard the door, and smiled. "I wondered when you would finally be capable of this," she said. "Diana Whitmore," Patricia said, "you are under arrest." She read the rights. Diana listened with the patient attention of someone who had heard a great many things in her life and found most of them mildly interesting. She had 3 backup identities, 4 offshore accounts, contingencies built on top of contingencies, 15 years of careful architecture designed to be impossible to collapse. All of it had been frozen simultaneously by a federal audit authorized by a woman Diana had classified as a controlled asset years ago. As they walked her through the door, Diana turned her head slightly and found Sharon standing in the corridor. Looked at her with those pale, calculating eyes. Sharon looked back and did not look away first. 3 months later. Sunlight. That is the first thing. Just sunlight everywhere. The kind of early March light in coastal Maine that is still thin but has warmth underneath it. More promise than delivery. The kind that tells you that something better is coming, whether you are ready for it or not. A small house. White clapboard, porch that needed repainting, a garden already getting away from whoever was supposed to be managing it. Yellow curtains in the kitchen window. A neighborhood that was quiet in a completely ordinary way. Sharon was on the back porch, hair loose around her shoulders, a mug of coffee, warm in both hands, bare feet on the cold boards, because she had decided she needed to feel the ground beneath her, looking out at the overgrown yard with the particular expression of someone who has finally let themselves believe they made it. Inside the house, sleeping, a daughter, 6 weeks old, dark hair, emphatic opinions about everything, delivered without warning at any hour. Lungs that could rattle the window frames when she chose to use them, and she chose frequently. Sharon had named her Alone, had sat with a list for 3 days. The name she chose was not a statement, was not weighted with anything she needed to process or reclaim or prove. It was just a name she loved, something new, entirely hers, unhaunted. The back door opened. Cole came out with 2 mugs, set one down next to hers, settled into the chair beside Orm. His hair was growing out a little longer now, a little less severe than it had been in 14 months of undercover work. He looked different here, less coiled, like something he had been holding for a long time had finally been set down. They sat for a while without talking. "She woke up twice while you were out," he said eventually. "She always wakes up twice. She is testing us. Is it working? Little bit? Yeah?" He smiled. A full one. Real and unhurried. And nothing like the almost smiles she had been collecting in the early days at the safe house. She said, "The grass. I will cut it today. You said that yesterday. I meant it less yesterday. Cole, I will cut it today. I promise." She looked at him sideways. "Okay," she said. "I believe you." She did. She believed him, which still surprised her, sometimes, 3 months out from a cliff in Rhode Island, the ease with which she believed this man. Not because she had stopped being cautious. She would never entirely stop being cautious, and she had decided that was not a flaw. It was a skill she had earned the hard way and intended to keep, but Cole Merritt had jumped off a 200-foot cliff, had held her above water for 20 minutes in a November storm, had stayed awake in a sea cave while helicopters swept the coastline, had driven through the night and organized the evidence package, and stood between her and 4 armed men in a Vermont forest, and had said, sitting in a safe house with the wood stove crackling and the snow coming down outside, "I did not move fast enough." Without qualification, without softening. Words are easy. What someone does when doing the right thing costs them something. That is who they actually are. She had learned that lesson in the hardest possible way. She was keeping it. They went back to the quiet, the good kind, the kind that does not need filling. The sun moved across the overgrown garden in its unhurried way. A bird landed on the fence post at the back of the yard and looked at them for a moment, with the superior confidence of a creature who has no particular problems this morning, and then flew away. Inside the house, the baby slept through the whole morning without waking once, which, in a story already full of things that seemed impossible, felt like the most impossible thing of all. Sharon put her hand over Cole's on the armrest between their chairs. He turned his hand over and held hers. No speeches, no declarations, no perfectly constructed moment. Just two people who had been through something unsurvivable, sitting in the March sunlight, holding on. The lesson. I want to stay with you for a few minutes before we go, because I think this story deserves more than a quick reaction. There are things in it worth sitting with, things I think you already understand, but that are worth saying out loud. Sharon Calloway did not survive because she was extraordinary. She survived because she did three specific things that any of us can do, even when everything has come apart at once. The first thing she did was document before she ran. The smartest decision Sharon made in this entire story was not at the cliff, or in the safe house, or at the harbor building. It was at the kitchen table, alone, 7 months pregnant, with a phone in her shaking hands, photographing every file on that drive, and sending the images to Beth's email before Garrett came home. She did not know yet that she would need them. She was still in shock. But the auditor in her, the professional she had been before she dimmed herself down to fit the life someone else was building around her, that part took over. It documented first. And that documentation became the thing that ultimately collapsed an operation 15 years in the making. Whatever is not adding up in your life right now, document it. Before you confront, before you run, before you do anything else. The truth is only as powerful as your ability to prove it. And the people who build these kinds of lives count on you being too shocked to act clearly in those first hours. Do not give them those hours. The second thing Sharon did was ask for help before she was certain she needed it. She sent that email to Beth with a subject line that said only, "Keep these safe. Do not open yet. I will explain." She did not qualify it. She did not say, "I am probably overreacting." She did not wait until she was absolutely sure the situation was bad enough to justify reaching out. So many of us, especially those of us who have been taught to manage our own needs quietly, to not be a burden, to handle things, we wait too long. We wait until we can prove we need help, until the situation is serious enough to justify it, until we have gathered enough evidence that asking does not feel like an imposition. Do not wait that long. Send the message before you are sure. Let someone else hold the thing, because the people who love you are not waiting for proof that you need them. They are waiting for you to ask. And the third thing is the one I think about most. Sharon did not find strength she did not have. She found strength she had stopped using. She had been a senior auditor. She had a gift for finding what people were trying to hide. She had professional skills, professional instincts, professional confidence. And she had quietly set all of it aside to become a version of herself that fit the life Garrett was constructing around her. Not because she was weak, because she trusted the wrong person. Because love, real or performed, has a way of making the territory of our own lives feel smaller than it is, and we accommodate, and we adjust, and we stop noticing what we have put on the shelf. When everything was taken away, what was left was the full version of Sharon Calloway, the woman who could look at a wall of criminal financial data in a Vermont safe house and say, "Okay, then we build the package." The woman who signed the audit authorization without a moment's hesitation. The woman who walked up 8 flights of stairs in a half-finished building and looked at her husband's fear and told him simply, clearly, without anger, "It is over." She did not become someone new. She became someone She already was. And I think that is true for most of us. I think we contain far more capacity than we routinely exercise. Not because we are weak, but because the life we are living does not ask for all of it, does not require it, sometimes actively discourages it. The question is not whether that version of you exists. It does. The question is what it would take to stop waiting for a crisis to call it forward. Sharon needed the worst thing she had ever experienced to remind her who she was. I hope it does not take that for you. I hope you find your way back to the full version of yourself on an ordinary Tuesday, in ordinary light, without anyone having to push you to the edge first. But if you are in the middle of the falling right now, if you are in the part of the story that feels like there is no surviving it, I want you to remember Sharon on those rocks in the dark, soaking wet, half frozen, her daughter still moving inside her, looking up at the lightning sky and breathing. Still here, choosing to stay here. The fall is not the ending. What you do next is, if this story stayed with you, if you were with Sharon from that cliff all the way to those yellow curtains in Maine, you already know what to do. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you are not already here, because what is coming next is going to hit just as hard and you do not want to miss it. And drop a comment below. I want to know one thing. Who scared you more, Garrett or Diana? Because I promise you, the conversation in those comments is going to be worth reading. I will be right here. Editorial disclaimer. This content has been carefully researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team. Crafted not for clicks, but to carry meaning, spark reflection, and leave you with something worth keeping.